Hello, in this video I'll talk about the most tricky aspect of my work, which is tackling racial stereotypes for Indian origin men living in the West. You've heard those statistics. Indian men are at the bottom of the pyramid, Asian men get the least matches on dating apps. Those kinds of statistics can ruin one's self-esteem as a South Asian origin man. And I've experienced that myself, and in this video I want to share with you how I've largely managed to overcome the insecurities stemming from this background. But before we get started, my name is Achil Rudolph, I'm a social confidence coach, and I help predominantly South Asian men to build that kind of social fitness which is necessary to go out into real-world social settings in the West and attract the right companions for their lives. And just talking about my focus of Indian origin men, it's already a very controversial topic by now. I get a lot of criticism from people for even choosing that as my niche, because putting people into groups and generalizing is always a bit uncomfortable. But we have to admit in our lives that certain groups have certain commonalities. That's what makes them a group. And of course, certain groups face challenges that are different from other groups' challenges. And I'm glad that I can actually talk about this openly. A lot of people, I think, are very scared of even talking about groups at this point. And that said, I'm not saying that what I think is the final truth. I have thought about this topic a lot and worked with Indian origin men for like 3 years now. But nevertheless, my thinking is still evolving in this area. And thinking, I believe, can only go so far. At some point you have to express, and that's what I'm doing with this video. I'm trying to enter a dialogue and open up the conversation to get new inputs. So I'm looking forward to your feedback and your comments on this one. It's important to open up though, and not to wait until you have the perfect answer, because you'll never have the perfect answer. And right now there's a lot of toxic stuff circulating on the internet. And if reasonably people just say, I need to think about it more, I need to figure out how to say this exactly so that I don't annoy anyone, well then there's only gonna be the toxic stuff floating around. So I want to change this with this video here. A little bit of background about me. I am half Indian and half German, and I grew up in Germany but with a mostly Indian dominated household, and nevertheless I never really experienced much of racism in my youth. I at least didn't think of it that way. I guess a big part of it is because Indian origins are just not discriminated the same way that other groups are discriminated against. But I did feel my race playing a role in this one area of life, which is dating. That was the one area where I felt like maybe there's something racist going on. I'm not sure. I felt this in a few moments, especially when I got rejected, obviously. And I got rejected a lot when I started this whole journey of learning how to even date. And once in a while, I would make the unconventional move of asking a girl who had just rejected me, why? Why don't you like me? And usually they would say something like, I'm not sure, just not the right fit, not the right vibe. Seems like we're not on the same wavelength. But once in a while, and I remember this one woman particularly, she said to me, after a long breather and a long pause, looking me in the eyes, I think I'm not comfortable sharing that with you. She said she's not comfortable talking about why she didn't like me. And in that moment, my mind immediately jumped to that conclusion that it must be because I'm Indian. That's one thing that she wouldn't be comfortable admitting. Well, we'll never know the real answer, but it is clear that Indian origin men face certain specific disadvantages. The data shows this clearly when you look at OkCupid, the dating app that shows a lot of their research, at least used to show. It's clear that Asian men get the least matches along with black women. But why is that? That's the big question. Is it because people just prefer certain skin colors or certain attributes that come with the Indian origin or disproportionately prefer other attributes. That would be just some kind of racial preference, and it's not exactly racism because, yeah, everyone has a right to prefer certain attributes. And you and me, we also prefer certain attributes that are probably linked and correlated with race. Or is it not so much because of the attributes, but rather because of the behaviors that are associated with Indian origins? And those could be real behaviors or just stereotypes, prejudices. It's hard to know whether it's because of the attributes or the behaviors. I think it's impossible to find out because those will always be linked. You'll always have both in a Indian man, the attributes and the behaviors. But in the end, it doesn't really matter whether it's the first or the second, because the only thing you can control is really the second. You can't change those attributes. You can't change your skin color easily. You can't change your hair color. You can't change your face much. So let's just focus on the second thing, the behaviors and possibly the stereotypes about behaviors, because that's what we can control. And here we are already a big step ahead of most other people thinking about this, because they get hung up on the attributes and about the things that they cannot change. And that is a natural tendency of the mind, because that is a bit easier. It's easier to just say, oh, I don't stand a chance because of my attributes. I'm too short, I'm too skinny, I'm too fat, too dark. And then you don't really have to deal with the behaviors which you can change. So when it comes to behaviors, we have to accept that yes, there are some stereotypes about behaviors. There are a lot of prejudices. But for a moment here, let's not get too defensive about them. Let's not immediately dismiss them, but actually look at those stereotypes at face value. Because in the end, what stereotypes are is just generalizations. And generalizations actually have a place. They're not always useful, but they actually make sense in some way. And you can kind of measure whether they're good and true generalizations or not. And of course, there are lots of stereotypes about Indian men that are just not true at all, or that are simplistic and cannot be verified. There are certainly behaviors, though, that are correlated with being Indians and that definitely affect the attractiveness of a person. And you want to be aware of those. And when we look at just the subset of Indian men living abroad who are actually on the dating market and their attractiveness towards Western women, that is not the same generalization that you would make about Indians as a whole. So it is easier to make generalizations about that particular subgroup in that particular micro interaction. Let's just take some examples. There is a stereotype that Indian men living abroad are into technical work, right? You could measure that. Probably there's a lot of truth to that statement. It's just the way the system is designed that it attracts mostly engineers who can afford to actually go through the vetting process of the German government. And that's a good thing, right? That's a usually good thing for attractivity, because it means you have on average higher earners in that group. But it's also a bit of a problem, because people who work a lot with machines tend to not be extremely good at working with humans. Another stereotype: Indian guys abroad don't have a lot of experience with dating. And so they don't really know how to interact with women in the romantic context, and often they don't also try too hard because they can rely on arranged marriage. Is it true? Is it not true? Hard to say, but there's probably quite a lot of truth to this. The Indian men that come abroad, those who work in technical backgrounds, yes, they were often very ambitious and had a lot of focus on their work. That's why they managed to come here and rise to the top of the income pyramid. And then, of course, they tend to be the ones who didn't go out that much, who didn't party a lot when they're in college, who didn't go on lots of dates. So there are these stereotypes that are actually somewhat true. And when there's a true stereotype that actually holds in a way, that is a pattern, not a stereotype, it's just a pattern that you can actually observe, then people are going to use those patterns. People are going to use those rules of thumbs and generalizations to help them make decisions. And now here's the key point. You need to understand that in dating, especially modern, especially online dating, people have to make decisions quickly, especially women, because they have a certain oversupply. Okay, they have lots of potential matches on a dating app, and they need to decide quickly. Especially they need to disqualify quickly. So they'll make a lot of type A error where they disqualify someone who's just not perfect on the first sight because they have a lot of options. And when that generalization, when that stereotype is largely true, and there is a situation like this where you have to make decisions very quickly, yeah, people are going to use those stereotypes to make decisions very quickly. It would be nice if that was not the case. It would be nice if people didn't use stereotypes and generalizations. It would be nice if everyone just took the time to look at every single person on their dating app and really read the bio. But that's not the world we live in. That's not going to happen in our lifetime. You have to pay attention to those racial stereotypes that exist in the world, especially those that have a certain truth to them. And you want to use those as information. You want to use them as a feedback and as a trigger to get you to act. And who cares if those triggers are somewhat unfair? A trigger is always helpful if it gets you to take action and change something that you want to change. It'll help you craft a better self and better yourself in the sense that you have more awareness for those biases and know how to present yourself to counteract those existing biases. And there's 3 steps that I recommend for you to go about this systematically. The first one is think for a moment, what are the stereotypes? What are those stereotypes that you believe lead to Indians as a group having less good results? And which of those stereotypes even do you think are somewhat true? And especially which of those stereotypes could apply to you? There's a few examples. Indians care too much about money and too little about hobbies and fun. Stereotype. Ask yourself, does it ring true? Does it ring false? Does it apply or could it apply to you? Indians are a bit timid, obedient, excessively attached to their family's judgment. They rely on arranged marriage and therefore don't really know how to date. They're very polite, indirect, almost bordering on dishonesty. They don't have a good taste in fashion. They're a bit insecure about their appearance. They don't care too much about health. They aren't so good at social interactions. Just a list of stereotypes. Ask yourself, which of these do you think is actually true? And which of these applies to you? And are there more? Write them all down. The second step, for those that apply to you, whether they're true or false, doesn't really matter. If they apply to you, does it bother you? And does it bother you enough to say, hey, I really want to change this aspect? That's what I called a trigger earlier. This stereotypes might have just brought up a awareness for something that you want to change. And maybe the stereotype isn't even true, right? The stereotype, Indians don't care too much about health, is probably not even true. But if you don't care too much about health, then this is a moment you want to cherish, because a stereotype, an unfair generalization, and an untrue generalization just got you to be aware about a problem that you want to work on. Use that as energy. And of course, that'll always be a difficult choice. To really change yourself in an aspect is not easy, and every change comes with a shadow. Like going and changing your physique will require a lot of work. It'll require a lot of time. Is it something you want to really invest in? Is it something worth your time? Even those more subtle personality trait changes will be not easy to execute if you feel like, yeah, actually I do rely a bit too much on arranged marriage and I don't really put a lot of effort into dating. Well, yeah, if you want to change that, you should know that it means sacrificing quite a bit of comfort and security that comes from the arranged marriage system. And then the third step, after you've decided which are the things that you actually want to work on, and then ideally also made a plan, a first tentative plan for how to work on them, the third step is how to communicate. How to communicate that you are different from the stereotype. If you clearly differ from the stereotype, you still need to find a way to bring that across to the other person. And if you're only using online dating, then it's going to be very hard to break the stereotype. Because online, as we said earlier, the heuristic, the rule of thumb, the generalization will continue to rule. People don't take the time to look at the bio, don't take the time to look at the details of the pictures. They make generalizations and they use stereotypes. And so online, I believe that you will not be able to show when you are really different, except if you build a complete bodybuilder physique or fly in a jet or something like that. So the best way to break those stereotypes is to go offline and show who you really are in person. That's where you can actually show many more aspects of your personality and kind of force the other person to take those other aspects into account. There's the stereotype, just to give an example, that Indians don't integrate too well and don't have a lot of social activities and care more about money, as I said earlier. Well, one of my clients, he learned around 10 languages. He's a polyglot. He still makes a lot of money and also sends most of it back to his home, but it's very clear that he doesn't not have enough hobbies. He's traveling a lot and he's learning languages all the time. Now, showing that through a Tinder profile or even Instagram by putting all the flags or all the languages or all the countries he's visited is not going to make a big difference. On those apps, people will still disqualify him as an Indian, use those rules of thumb which associate in their mind Indians with not being very international, not being very good at learning new languages and learning new cultures. So that would not have worked. He had to go out. He had to go out and meet people in real life. And when he meets someone while he's traveling in Paris and speaks to her in perfect French, that's when the other person realizes immediately that this guy does not qualify for any of our stereotypes about Indians. That's when it gets under her skin. And for him and for me now, this genetic and racial background just doesn't play a role anymore. When I say I'm Indian or when I say I'm half Indian in a conversation with someone new, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really make any difference to the conversation. The conversation is determined by what we talk about, the vibe, the voice, the eye contact. It's totally clear from the get-go that I'm not a typical Indian when I talk to someone. And of course, in real world situations, you have so much more information that is going to add onto your image of the other person. You have the body language, you have the voice, you have the vibe, you have the location itself. Where are you? That says a lot about you. What's your community? What friends are around? What's the content of what you say? And skin color itself really doesn't make a difference at this point. And I wish you could all realize this. I wish you could all be in that situation. For me, it took a long time to get there, but I think you can get there too. And it makes a lot of sense that the skin color itself doesn't really play a role in human attraction. I mean, we're one species. We can all procreate with each other. That's the definition of being a species. And it would have not made sense for nature to build in some biological barrier between different races. In summary, we have to accept the fact that there are certain statistical differences between different racial, ethnic, national groups. And a lot of stereotypes about those differences actually do reflect the differences that exist. Certain behaviors that are correlated with the Indian background actually do make Indian men less attractive, especially those Indian men who live in the West and want to attract a Western partner. But those behaviors can be changed. You can overcome those statistical differences because you are not a statistic. You are not an average. You're not an average guy. You can be an outlier, and it's not even that hard. It's just you have to understand what it means to be an outlier. And what it means to be an outlier is just to do outlier stuff, to do things that most people just don't do. And it doesn't have to be learning 10 languages. It can be just watching this video. Watching this video till the end is an outlier activity, I can tell you that. Joining my free community and actually starting to work on this area more actively, going through the courses, actually finishing the free courses that I put out. Those are very outlier activities, just to give you some ideas. For me personally, having this awareness around the disadvantage of being in a group that has certain negative stereotypes attached was actually a big trigger, and it helped me to take my whole personal development journey extremely seriously. I turned that disadvantage into an advantage, I would say. Because without that trigger and this feeling that I had a bigger challenge to overcome, I wouldn't have started hustling in the way that I did. I wouldn't have started building my own business. I probably wouldn't be here recording this video without that problematic, challenging background. Without that, I might have just married at 23 and lived a very ordinary life. So I'm grateful for this challenge every single day. I'm grateful for all the challenges that the universe gives me. It's part of my affirmation ritual to thank the universe, because I say the challenges that I get are the ones that I need to grow. And of course, it's still important to fight injustice, and there is injustice in the world. And life is unfair in many ways, but I think in so many ways that it becomes unfathomable who's actually at an advantage versus someone else. Everyone has their own challenges. Everyone has an aspect of unfairness. And there's just no way to measure who is in a better and who's in a worse position. So I would not get butthurt about the disadvantages that you have faced in your life. All you can really do is to stay focused on the things that you can implement and change. And in the short run, that's your behaviors. That's your own life. Of course, in the long run, you can also go into politics. And if that's something you want to do, I respect that a lot. I respect people a lot who tackle the aggregate big injustices in the world. But that's not personal development, that's politics. In personal development, you stay laser focused on your life right now. You look at what you're doing right now. Does that actually make sense? Does that get you closer to your goal? And then you still end up influencing the rest of the world, the aggregate, by being a great role model, or by building a great business, or by building a great charity. If you need more support with these very difficult topics, I highly recommend to join my free community of South Asian origin men who want to work on their confidence. And you'll find lots of role models in there, lots of people who have already gone a few steps ahead on this path, including me. You have also free courses that I put out and beginner-friendly support from the community. So I'm looking forward to seeing some of you there. Also, leave a like for this video so that more people can discover it. So long. Samgachadvam. Namaskar.